The Jazz dominated Luka and LeBron, but are they flying a touch too close to the sun?
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, and I'm excited and honored to have the opportunity to fill in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. It's always a pleasure talking to you guys. As many of you guys know by now, I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's a credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of the 2023-2024 NBA Draft Combines, Jazz broadcast assistant statistician, lover of college hoops, so I can tell you about all the prospects. And, of course, I attend all the games, so I'll tell you all about the Jazz's recent games and the one coming up today. And, stay tuned for a couple of the geeky numbers of usual you've become accustomed to with David Locke. But I'll bring you a unique perspective as a diehard hoops fan, NBA draft analyst, Jazz employee to make you as knowledgeable as possible about your Utah Jazz and what's a critical juncture in franchise history. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen each and every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question is, who would you take at 3 should the Jazz draft third? It's something we'll talk about a lot coming up in the offseason, but figured I'd ask right now. Assuming Cooper Flag's off the board, you can choose who's off at 2, who's there at 3, and comment that below in the YouTube so I can engage with you guys. By the way, your favorite podcast now has a newsletter. Introducing Locked On Jazz Daily Newsletter. One stop for the ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. And start your day with the all-new free Locked On Jazz newsletter. So today, what's on the agenda? I'll break down what went into the Jazz earning an easy, unexpected win against a red-hot Lakers team. In the second segment, I'll discuss the recent play of Keyonte George and analyze the good and the pitch for him for what's good, because he's often criticized, but I'll praise him too. I'll tell you why he looks really good, and it's not as critical as most people are about Keyonte George. And in the final segment, I'll touch on the keys to the Jazz-Clippers game, as well as tell you why I think the Jazz resemble a bit of an Icarus story, flying a touch too close to the sun when trying to thread the needle of developing the young players, the young personnel, but maintaining good draft odds. So let's dive right in. All right, so the Jazz and Lakers had a back-and-forth first half featuring 15 lead changers, and you thought, okay, that it might be more of the same in the second half. The Jazz are playing some of their best ball of the season, and so are the Lakers. The Lakers have won 9 of their last 10 heading into this one and just throttled the Jazz 132-113. But you'd have thought wrong. I definitely thought wrong as the Jazz pulverized the Lakers in the third quarter. I mean, the Jazz opened up a 25-point lead behind scoring on 7 straight field goals and on 9 of 10 possessions. Those were the other 2 that were not field goals, were free throws, obviously. And in the Lakers, in a similar time frame, while the Jazz opened up a 25-point lead, went 1 of 11 from the floor with 3 turnovers. I mean, that'll swing a game right there. That's exactly what happened. The Jazz opened up a big lead. They were super effective. The Lakers clawed to what I believe was 74-69. The Jazz were up 5. The Jazz had a lead. And I even had a note ready. I was working with the Lakers broadcast. I had a note ready that said, last lead, 39-37 for the Lakers. That was the last lead they possessed, because right after that, the Jazz opened up a 96-71 lead. That's a massive turnaround. That's 22-2. The Jazz decided they weren't playing any games. They swung the game with that. The Jazz, we always talk about similar keys, and we'll talk about this a little bit for the Clippers. The Jazz always struggle turning the ball over. That's always the case, right? The Jazz commit the tune. This is what the tune is, right? The Jazz commit the most turnovers per game, 17.5, allowing opponents to score 21.9 points per game off of their turnovers. That was entering the game against the Lakers. The Lakers aren't particularly prolific at scoring in transition or forcing turnovers, but the Jazz won on the turnover battle, only committing 12 as opposed to the Lakers' 14. And the Jazz only gave up 5 live ball turnovers, which are, if you're looking at the box score, 5 Lakers steals. That's massive, absolutely massive and pivotal for a team that often gives up easy ones. Turnovers matter. Like, the Jazz give up so many easy baskets, and part of the reason their defense is not very good and they lose games is because they lose the turnover battle. In fact, the Jazz, speaking of easy baskets and how to win games, the Jazz doubled up the Lakers in fast break points, 26-13, and won the points in the paint battle handily which admittedly is a stat that isn't fully telling because the paint is a big area. Some of those shots are difficult, but the Jazz dominated. They had 150% of the points in the paint that the Lakers had at 54 to 36. And at one point, they doubled them up 44 to 22. For reference, the Lakers actually are one of the best in the NBA at points in the paint. They average over 50 per game, so the Jazz really limited their output. That said, most of that came with Anthony Davis, so I wonder how that disparity switches. So here's a fun fact for you, speaking about the importance of turnovers. The Jazz have a 4-2 record this season when winning the turnover battle. 4-2, meaning that the Jazz have lost it 47 times and are 9-38 when losing it. So, furthering that fun fact, the Jazz have won the turnover battle by more than 2 one time all year, winning the battle by 6 once. And then the Jazz have won it by 1 3 times and 2 twice. So, this was winning by 2. That was the second of the time. And the Jazz win at a 67% rate when they win the turnover battle. It's really rare. So, let's go back to the paint dominance. A large reason for that was Walker Kessler. The Lakers couldn't score in the third quarter, and Walker Kessler had his season high in blocks with 6, and he altered many more. I was working with the Lakers broadcast, as I mentioned, and they could not stop raving about Kessler's energy. That's going to be a theme. It is a theme in terms of the Jazz's recent success. It was the old Gobert factor. That's what it looked like. Lauri was also very good early. He had 32, hitting 6 threes. And the other key to the Jazz's success was getting to the free throw line. And they shot 33 free throws against the Lakers, who typically dominate the free throw line. Now, the story whenever Luka and LeBron are in town, I'm well aware, and it was for me too. I fanboyed. I don't typically, but I watched LeBron James at 40 warm up, and he hit 3 straight half courts, and the crowd was oohing and awing. The story's LeBron, and the story's Luka. But neither really controlled the game, despite being effective from the field, each going 6 of 13, and they combined for 34 points and 10 assists. That's pedestrian. And that's honestly, if you had told me, 34 and 10, I would have said, which one of them got that? Not combined. Like that's really not very good. The Jazz did an excellent job in this game. And Reeves, you'd say, he must have had a good game because the Lakers have been playing excellent basketball. 9 of their last 10. They're one of the hottest teams in the NBA. And Reeves really struggled early on in this game in particular. He ended up with an 11 assist game, but it wasn't telling. The only player on the Lakers that I thought played well was Rui Hachimura. As for the Jazz, Lauri had his best game in a long, long time, both efficiency-wise and in terms of volume and highlights. He had dunks and he had big threes, and he looked motivated today. And the youngsters played well, thriving in this up-tempo play that they've employed since the emergence of Isaiah Collier. And I really think it's starting to get the rest of the team energized because Collier is going to help the bigs. He's going to get in the paint, break the defense, throw alley-oops to Kessler, to Collins. But I think Lauri is starting to find a comfort zone with Isaiah Collier, and that's going to be vital throughout the rest of the season as something to monitor, along with the emergence of the other young players. And we're going to talk about one of them in Keyonte George. Touching on stat lines, speaking of Keyonte George, he was stellar with 20 points, 10 assists, and 7 rebounds. Kessler was 8 of 8 from the field. He had his 6 blocks. He had 9 rebounds. Isaiah Collier had 10 points, 9 assists, and 7 boards. So all the young guys played well. They didn't look like they were oohing and awing, seeing Luka, seeing LeBron. And the quicker pace has the Jazz noticeably playing more freely and more confidently. And Will Hardy has said, and he's said as much in his press conferences. And he's heaped praise on Collier and on Kessler in particular for being engines on offense in the case of Collier. And in the case of Kessler, it's on defense with his energy and his running the floor, turning defense into offense and putting the opposing team at a disadvantage when they get a stop. When the Jazz get a stop, they run, and Kessler's a sprinter. He gets up the floor, and his energy has been infectious. So one of the perks of working for the Jazz is I get to go to a lot of Will Hardy's press conferences at home, and the road ones, I edit many of them. So that the motifs of late have been energy leading to ball movement and pace of play, especially provided by Isaiah Collier, being infectious and making life easier for the bigs, and Kessler's energy and activity making life easier for everyone else and making it something that's cool to play defense. You know, the Jazz have been not very good defensively for a while, but Walker Kessler is a very good individual defender, and it's making more and more of the players aware of what the reward of playing defense is in the eyes of the coaching staff. Isaiah Collier has also helped that cause, and I think Keyonte George has really improved his defense alongside Isaiah Collier. Hardy has talked about, and the third motif would be Hardy is believing in both wins and losses that the Jazz are really growing as a team, and that they're a few bounces away from an even more wins of late. Like, look at all the close games the Jazz have lost. The Phoenix game, which I think the Jazz blew. That was a really poor finish to a game. I think the strategy was poor making the free throw. That's great. The Pacers game, execution late. They struggled, had a few turnovers, and didn't get back on defense. Didn't pick up the ball, and that wasn't just youngsters. Like, Jordan Clarkson didn't get back on defense in a vital moment of that game. That's pivotal. But you have a couple different bounces of the ball, and the Jazz are 5-5. And they've really shown resilience of late. They were down against the Suns, down and out, and they stole that game, and then they blew it again. They stole the game against the Warriors. So Will Hardy's talking about the energy has really provided a spark for the Jazz and a belief system for, hey, we do belong, and it does look that way. So they've won 3 of their last 7, easily could be 5-5. And I'll talk to you guys about a guy I think was written off by many in the Utah Jazz fan base, and I believe has been pretty good of late and has really thrived in the last 10 games, and certainly has been a beneficiary of Isaiah Collier and his distribution. That's Keyonte George. We'll talk about his recent play and more after a word from Wayfair. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or I just want to give some space to start the new year fresh, Wayfair has everything you need. And most importantly, it's all within your budget. I'm currently looking for furniture, and their huge selection makes it easy to find pieces that fit my style and my budget. My favorite part, you ask? The free and hassle-free delivery, even for larger items. Wayfair's site was so easy to navigate, and I found everything I needed in no time. There's something for every style, every home, no matter where you live or what you prioritize. It's always comfortable, and it's always within your budget. So no matter your space or budget, Wayfair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals with endless inspiration for every space. And I can tell you guys, with my own personal testament, that Wayfair was a massive help for me in a time crunch. They got everything done when I needed it most, because you don't want to be in a new place without a couch. And if you're wondering, the delivery was indeed fast and hassle-free. So give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's wayfair.com. WAYFAR.com. Wayfair. Every style, every home. All righty, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, filling in for David Locke. And speaking of David, I spoke to him after the Jazz game last night, and he mentioned something interesting I thought I'd dive into, and found out has some credence because I thought it had some credence. He said, how many players in the NBA can score 20 points, collect 7 rebounds, and dish out 10 assists? And that was exactly what Keyonte did somehow subtly last night in the win over the Lakers. It was not a loud performance, but it was effective. It was discreet, but he hit the shots he needed to hit. He distributed on time and played with energy. And defensively, he took challenging assignments. I know Luka didn't play well. I know he's come back from injury. I know Austin Reeves didn't shoot well. And I think some of that is just they missed shots. But you can't fault Isaiah Collier, Keyonte George, guys like that for their efforts in the game. So I'm going to give him some credit. Now, what's important to add for context to David's simple question is that Keyonte George is a second-year player and is not right now the lead guard. And that stat line is difficult to accomplish, even if he were. So it's very important to say, you know what? The guy came off the bench. He came into a ball game, and the Jazz were heavy underdogs in this basketball game. And he found a way to effectively put up a stat line that I think is exceedingly rare for any player in the NBA. You look at the 450 players in the NBA, and there's not that many that can put up that stat line, particularly off the bench. Now, I understand that the Jazz have started him before, and it's not, wow, this guy's deep in the bench. I'm just saying, he had to come off the bench and do it in different lineups and step into a game and really play well from the get-go, because it's not easy to come off the bench with the rhythm. Anyway, Keyonte is reaping the rewards of what he was scrutinized for by our fan base. What I mean by that is, through being forced to play the point guard and learn a totally new position, he's developed into a better passer, a better decision maker, and an operator of the offense that I believe we can trust as a secondary facilitator. But now the emergence of Isaiah Collier has allowed for that distribution to be supplementary and makes Keyonte look more versatile as a player through the rigors of learning the new position. Like everyone said, oh, Keyonte George can't play point guard. And, if you listen to David a lot, he talked about on the broadcast the book being out on Keyonte as teams like to pressure Keyonte George and how teams would pressure him in the front court and it would rattle him. He had some turnovers. He would shoot a little bit worse. Those are all learning curves that happen. But particularly when you join a new league, the NBA, the best basketball in the world, and you're playing a new position for the first time ever as a rookie in the NBA. And then as the first time ever, his second year in the NBA earlier this season. So, Isaiah Collier has really helped a lot of players in the Jazz, but I think it's important to note the guy that he supplanted in the starting lineup, that usurped the position, he's actually helped perhaps the most. So Keyonte is reaping those rewards. But let me remind you about the path of Keyonte George for those of you who may have forgotten or don't know. Keyonte was a McDonald's All-American, ranked 6th in his recruiting class, coming out as the 3rd best two guard, actually behind two guys that he is far better than, Nick Smith Jr. and Amari Bailey, both of whom were drafted. Smith, I want to say 27th pick, and Amari Bailey around 41st, 42nd. He's actually, I went through the entire list of shooting guards. He's actually the best shooting guard in that recruiting class by a country mile. So Keyonte George, really good in high school. And then he made this untenable name for himself by scoring 30 plus points. I want to say it was 37 and 32 in back-to-back games with a depleted Baylor roster as an 18-year-old in July against Italy and Canada's U23 teams in the Pan Am Games, prompting myself and others in the draft community to salivate. And in my case, to tweet, I think I found the next Jamal Murray. And I really did. I really thought, oh my gosh, this guy's just like Jamal Murray. He had the shot selection that looked just like what just absolutely pulverized the Jazz in the bubble. It looked the exact same the way he scored. And then I said in a follow-up tweet, if he can play combo guard like Murray, who learned to play a bit of the point guard next to a facilitator like Jokic, he can be a top 7 pick like Jamal Murray was. I thought I found the comparison. Murray was a common comp actually by the end of the year, and CJ McCollum, another one, neither natural point guards, but guys that can play the point guard but are natural scorers. I don't think that was crazy, but the expectations became untenable. But that was the if he can play the point guard. And then at Baylor, Keyonte played the 3. He's a 2 guard. He played the 3 because he was playing next to diminutive guards, and he played at 225 pounds next to upperclassmen, all-conference caliber guards, and still scored the rock well. That's his gig. He was a scorer, even battling through ankle issues and playing out of position, away from the ball. He scored the ball. He was named Big 12 Freshman of the Year, as well as second team All Big 12. George scored 506 points as a freshman, the second most in school history, and holds the program record for most 20-point games as a freshman with 12. It's impressive. Like every step of the way, he's been a very good scorer. I say all that to say this. He is more comfortable and more adept playing the 2 guard. There's nothing wrong with it. There is nothing wrong with him being more comfortable playing the natural position. I know you're going to say, well, he's not big enough to be a 2 guard. But if you pair he and Isaiah Collier, there's an argument they're big enough because Isaiah Collier is a burly, strong guard, and Keyonte George isn't diminutive. He's a true 6'4". So I think there's a pathway in which this works, or you have him slotted off the bench like he is right now. So yes, he's more adept at playing the 2 guard, but last year, the work he put in at the 1, and as well as this year, was not in vain. It actually may help him tremendously with the Jazz as he develops into a supplementary playmaker, making it easier to stomach the poor defense, which my eyes tell me has also improved. And the reason I say it's easier to stomach that, because he's going to be able to score and be a beneficiary of Isaiah Collier's driving to the paint, kick out, shots, all this stuff. And then he's going to be able to make the right decisions because he was forced to make, you have to run this offense. You have to be able to handle the pressure. And all of a sudden, he's going to be far more free to make the right decisions and attack closeouts, which are instinctual for him. And then he's going to make the right decisions too, as well as be less in his head about scoring. And he's recently performed very well. And I think, like I mentioned in an aside right there, Collier's defensive competitiveness and speed with which he plays, I think has provided competitiveness with through the team, with especially the guards. I've noticed Keyonte George playing significantly better defense and taking more pride in it. Recently, he and Isaiah Collier have guarded the likes of Devin Booker and Luka Doncic, and I won't say they're going to win that matchup, but I've been impressed with the effort put forth. Now, here's some evidence talking about the growth of that tandem. provided by Clean the Glass. Keyonte paired with Collier plays most often with, of course, Isaiah Collier, Lauri, John Collins, and Walker Kessler. That lineup scores 139 points per 100 possessions with an effective field goal percentage of 56%. And the differential is 14.7 points per possession, meaning they outscore teams by 14.7 per 100 possessions. Now, Keyonte playing with the same lineup, but instead of Collier, there's Jordan Clarkson, has an effective field goal percentage of 64%, which is really impressive. Points per 100 possession is at 118, which is not as great. And it concedes 151, meaning the differential is almost minus 33. So you would say, oh, Isaiah Collier is certainly a difference there. But that's a routinely employed lineup. And Collier and George playing together almost exclusively in this lineup. And that has me very encouraged as a Jazz fan. Yes, I work for the team, but my heart wants the Jazz to do so well. And then I watch them and I'm frustrated at times. But this has me believing that we have the point guard of our future potentially in Isaiah Collier. And I don't think the Jazz fans should give up on Keyonte George yet, even if it's not as the point guard of the future, like Danny Ainge asked the question of. So now let's go back to the question David Locke asked. How many players can do that, especially in year two and off the bench? Not many in the NBA and very, very few off the bench. And this isn't a fluke. Keontae's been very good for the last 10 games. This is not unique. So here's some history. Against the Pacers, both Keyonte George and Isaiah Collier had double-doubles, both scoring 10 points plus and 10 assists. That's very rare. That's the first time for the Jazz. And in the last 10 games, Keyonte George has averaged 17.4 points, 6.1 assists, and 4.2 rebounds in 10 games. That's really, really good. And that's the sample size in which Isaiah Collier has become comfortable in the starting lineup. And Keyonte George has really thrived, and it's not been talked about enough. So I say all of that to ask this. How have we prematurely labeled Keyonte as not part of the future just because his true skill set has always been more to score the rock, and now you're seeing less of an emphasis and necessity to distribute, but it's looking more natural for him to distribute, and he looks significantly more comfortable? I think that's possible. I mean, he's 21 years old. There's a lot of growth that can happen for players, and I don't think if you looked at number 16 pick. I talked to Gordy Chiesa, I reference him all the time, about how he always talks about the pressure that comes with the draft spot you're in. And he talked to me yesterday about Alex Len. If Alex Len were picked 15th rather than 5th, he'd be seen as a solid pick. And if he was picked 25th instead of 5th, he'd be seen as a great pick because he's had longevity. But he was picked 5th, so he's seen as a disappointment. Keyonte at 16, both production-wise and skill set-wise, is a steal. And I think Danny Ainge, asking the point of, is he the point guard of the future, sets fans up to be overly critical. The past 16 picks have been McCain. He's been really good, so probably in the same ilk as George, maybe even a touch better. A.J. Griffin, he's out of the league. Alperen Sengun, he's an all-star. Isaiah Stewart, I'd take Keyonte. Chuma Okeke, I'd take Keyonte. Zaire Smith didn't play because of medical issues, but therefore Keyonte. Justin Patton out of the league. Gershon Yabusele, interesting story. He's back in the league, but he was out of the league very quickly. I'd take Keyonte. And Terry Rozier, and honestly, I'd take Keyonte. So he's upper half in those easily, and I think he's being reacted to far too critically considering draft slot and the expectations put on him. And right now, he's playing really, really well. So I'm trying to heap some praise on him to those who have been critical. I know I'm going to get some pushback on here, and I'm not saying this is the all-star. This is the guy that changed the Jazz's future. Don't misunderstand me. But he does deserve some praise. Well, coming up next, we're going to talk about the Jazz dueling the Clippers before the break after this rescheduled game. And also, the Jazz could be flying too close to the sun, winning as much as they are of late. We'll talk about that cautionary tale next. All righty, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. Always thrilled to be here with you guys talking what I love most, Jazz basketball. So, what are the things to watch out for? I'm going to give you a brief preview on the Clippers. The Clippers are playing well. Firstly, the thing I'll be most curious to watch is Walker Kessler versus Ivica Zubac. So Kessler, if you look at his games and if you were to go through a game log, and maybe this is pretty geeky because it's what I do for my job in terms of siphoning through statistics, Walker Kessler dominates inferior centers. So, for instance, he dominated the glass and dominated the paint, and the Lakers broadcast I worked with yesterday was raving about how good Kessler was. But that was Jackson Hayes. And then Jackson Hayes got hurt, and it was Christian Coloco, and it was Alex Len, who had been waived by the Wizards and the Kings. So I just don't know how great Walker Kessler is from that. But if you look through his best games, it's typically against inferior centers. There's nothing wrong with that. But this is a great litmus test for Walker Kessler to see how good he is against a guy in Ivica Zubac, who sneakily had one of the best seasons of any center in the league. That's not got the name like Jokic or Wembanyama, but he's been unbelievably productive. So I'll be watching that interior battle. Now, from the statistical standpoint, the Clippers are excellent at getting defensive rebounds, limiting the opposing team to grabbing only 10 offensive rebounds. The Jazz are one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the league. They're fourth in terms of when the Jazz shoot the ball, they get the fourth most percentage of their own misses, which is about 32% of their misses. Like, it's really, really good from the Jazz. But the Clippers are excellent at boxing out. They're third in the league, only allowing 10 offensive rebounds. So the other part of that is the Jazz are pretty darn good at getting second chance points. The Clippers only allow 12.5, which is ranked second in the league. The Jazz are upper half and actually top 10 in second chance points. And the Clippers, like I said, are very, very stout defensively. Anyway, we'll get to some numbers that support that. So that's going to be a matchup on the interior that largely has to do with Walker Kessler because he's the best offensive rebounder in the NBA by percentage. As for taking care of the ball, which, I'm going to have to talk about because the Jazz really struggle with that often, but they won the battle last night. It'll be exceedingly important tonight because the Jazz and Clippers are two stylistic nightmares if you're the Jazz, because the Jazz turn it over a lot, and the Clippers are ranked at third in steals, averaging over 9 per game, and the Clippers average over 20 points per game off of turnovers, which is ranked second in the league, and the Jazz are ranked last in the NBA in terms of giving the ball away. And the worst part here for the Jazz is they give up 22 points per game in transition, or excuse me, off of turnovers. So that'll be important. Easy baskets and extra possessions, those typically dictate who wins the basketball game, and they did against the Lakers as the Jazz dominated the paint. They dominated transition points. They dominated second chance points. Everything the Jazz dominated, and they won the game in easy fashion. So now let's talk about the stylistic side of things. The Clippers like to isolate. They love to isolate their stars. And James Harden, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do that? Norman Powell is really good in isolation too. So the next key for the Jazz to me is isolation defense. And this will be a true test of how good the Jazz are defensively and how connected they are. Because often we talked about them giving up points in transition. That's not in half court. Walker Kessler controls the paint in the half court. But I'll be curious to see how the Jazz handle the Clippers isolation, which they average about 14 isolations per game, which is ranked third in the league. Technically 13.5 if any of you guys who are love geeky numbers like myself would look that up. So I'll be curious to see how the Jazz's young backcourt handles the staunch defense of the Clippers, who are also excellent in field goal percentage defense, and they don't allow you to attack the paint. They are the best at protecting the paint. They don't give you easy baskets on the interior, making you spray out to the outside, and they're pretty good at defending the three as well. One of the better defensive teams in the league, but they've actually changed their roster a little bit. They don't have Terrence Mann, noted Jazz killer. I'm sorry to Jazz fans reliving that nightmare like myself. You won't see him on the court, but they did get better at shooting, which I think is a good thing because you look at James Harden's prime, he always was around shooters. You go get Bogdanovich and players that can create like Bones Highland, that might be better for the team that they have than a player I think in Terrence Mann is better than Bogdanovich. Now let's go to the point that might have intrigued you more as opposed to this preview. Why are the Jazz reenacting the Icarus story of flying too close to the sun when it killed Icarus and his wings melted and he fell and plummeted? So this is a cautionary tale. And the reason the Jazz's wonderful play of late is encouraging, is terrifying, is essentially other teams are losing more than the Jazz, that the Jazz had surpassed in lottery odds. Like, there is an incentive to losing games, and the Jazz have an incentive to internally develop, and they've done an excellent job doing so. And I think it's great. The Jazz are 3-7 in their last 10, and losing those two close ones against Indiana and Phoenix in a strange way was great. But there are teams that are playing worse, and the Jazz are 3-7 in their last 10. If you look at the worst 5 teams in the NBA, in which the Jazz are included in, the Jazz are the best of those 10 games, and they easily could have been 5-5. Now, the Jazz right now are in third in terms of the best positions for the lottery odds, and they are only a half game out of fourth. And once the odds reach fourth, they drop precipitously. And once you reach fourth, you are in a scary position. And the Jazz are, like I said, only 0.5 games out of fourth right now. The Jazz currently, according to Tankathon, hold a 52% chance to draft within the top 4. That's really good. And a 14% chance to draft first. This is all per Tankathon. And I know there's more precise sciences, but this is a good way of telling you how important it is to be within the top 3. The reason this is important, and I know you guys understand, like, this is going to get you Cooper Flagg, perhaps. This could get you Dylan Harper. It could get you Ace Bailey. But there's a real chance 50% is not a guarantee that you're drafting at top 3. It's not. I mean, that's a coin flip. So 52%, not that much better either, but it has vital importance. And we'll talk about this in a future episode about how important it is to be drafting within that top 3 in terms of finding franchise-altering talents. And that's what I believe is the job of when you're bad and you're in these situations. That's the job. You got to get someone that can change things. But the reason this is important is I would argue Will Hardy has been great, fantastic. An example would be that the Jazz last year at this same juncture, through 52 games of the year, I know the Jazz have played 53, they were 26-26. In fact, they actually started off really poorly, made some tactical adjustments, employed some zone, made some lineup changes, and they found their way to 26-26. Well, who sits at 26-26 about right now? The Suns, team that really made win now moves, and they are still at a point where the Jazz, who were in a limbo last year, were at. Oh, and they have Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant is the exact type of talent you dream to draft and rebuild your franchise around. Look, the Sonics did it, then turned into the Thunder, and I know they hit on Westbrook and Harden as well, but Kevin Durant was that dude and is that dude. However, year 2 of Hardy, where the Jazz were 26-26, so I praised him for those adjustments, had the Jazz drafting 10th or 9th, 9th the year before that, and then 10th the year where they started 26-26 and finished 31-51, meaning the Jazz went 5-25. So that might happen again this year, where the Jazz, I understand, they're 13-40 right now. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Jazz end up with 18 wins, because following a similar script to last year in terms of finishing. And for those of you who are everydayers, I talked about how I thought the Jazz would have north of 60 losses this year going through the schedule, which was difficult, and with the understanding of what is in this year's NBA draft class. So the Jazz drafted 9th and 10th respectively, and I'd argue the Jazz's best draft pick in that same time frame came at number 29 with Isaiah Collier. So that's a bit of luck. But the point that I make is drafting at 9 and 10 is not a slam dunk. It's not a guarantee you're going to get a guy that even fits in the rotation. That's not a slight to Cody Williams. It's not a slight to Taylor Hendricks, of course, who had a terrible injury. But with Will Hardy's coaching ability and the Jazz playing brilliantly right now, this best stretch of play of the year, that's great. And internal development is vital. But it is simultaneously running the risk of jeopardizing what the Jazz are trying to accomplish and finding the talent that can transition this franchise alongside Lauri Markkanen, who signed this long contract, alongside the youthful talent who's really emerging, like Walker Kessler, Isaiah Collier, Keyonte George. It's running a risk. And I know it's a double-edged sword, but the Jazz front office is certainly aware of this. And I understand that it's frustrating to watch at times, watching losing. But I think that the Jazz are flying a little bit too close to the sun in winning this many games and playing that many close games, which, yeah, when you lose the game, you could say, oh, it's the perfect way to move and improve. Yeah, you'd rather lose a close one, but you also don't want to win so much that you find yourself outside of the chances of finding a star. And as Jazz fans, we want that franchise-altering talent desperately. But that said, the internal development is vital. And you need it, because if you do get the star, and hopefully when you get that star, you need someone to support them. And I'm not sure the draft, and this is a topic for another time, and I'm going to tease it for another episode, this either tomorrow or next week. But I'm not sure the draft, where the Jazz are hoping to find the transcendent star, has as many bona fide stars, despite being a very good class compared to last year's, as many proclaimed it does. I don't think it is a 7 all-star draft. That was kind of the thought, that this draft was unbelievable. I'm getting a little nervous about the potential about some of these guys that were proclaimed stars. And we'll talk about the draft and expectations throughout the rest of the season and in episodes to come, and detail the history around where the stars have come from within a draft and how teams have gotten them. Can't wait to talk to you guys tomorrow and next week as well. Always a pleasure to talk with Jazz fans on here. So thank you for making Locked On Jazz your first listen. And with your next listen, check out Locked On and Locked On NBA Big Board and listen to hear about those prospects that I talked about having maybe not as much of a ceiling as you may think. Maybe they'll think differently and they'll convince you otherwise. By the way, your new favorite podcast, your old favorite podcast now has a new newsletter, and it's introducing Locked On Jazz Daily Newsletter. One stop for your ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at Locked On Daily. That's lockedondaily.com, and start your day with an all-new free Locked On Jazz newsletter. So thank you guys, and see you tomorrow.